Hey everyone. So it's time to tackle the energy FUD. FUD meaning fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And it's a common thing to be thrown at Bitcoiners, and it's a hard one to dismiss because, again, it's quite complicated. But again, it's just nonsense. Um, I don't really know where to start with it, but there's a few topics that need to be covered here because ultimately I'm trying to offer this video as a rebuttal to different kinds of criticism. There are those that just don't think Bitcoin is a good thing, and therefore, if it uses any energy at all, it's a waste of energy. Those people need to figure out for themselves why Bitcoin is useful, and clearly lots of people find it useful, so their worldview is becoming increasingly obviously wrong as more and more people start to accept it as money. So I'm not going to respond to those people because to them, even using the amount of energy that one microwave uses is too much energy. There's nothing I can really say to people like that. So let's move up a level, and it's to people that think Bitcoin is good, but it would be good if instead of just mining when miners spent energy, they also did something useful with all of the electricity they were using and all of the computation they were doing. The reason you don't want to do this when you're mining Bitcoin is because you introduce economic externalities, which is a bad thing. There was an alternative to Bitcoin called Prime Coin early last decade, came out soon after Bitcoin did, that said we're going to do just that. Miners for this currency are also going to find prime numbers, not just do useless proof of work to secure the hardest monetary network ever known to man. Useless. Okay, sure, but we're going to do something else even more useful, so it's superior to Bitcoin in that regard. The reason it's awful is because, as the aforementioned economic externality, means that less predictable things happen. An analogy for this is, imagine you have a precious metal like gold, which has use for so many as a store of value, but it also has use as an actual industrial metal for certain applications. That's actually annoying for the price discovery mechanism or the market of gold, because what happens if that industrial use case for it goes away? What happens to all the people using it as a store of value? They're very disappointed because that affects the market negatively and it goes down. So I don't want to have the proof of work and the security of my chosen currency be somewhat at the whim of the marketplace for prime numbers, because it's not actually relevant to the currency itself. It's external. And as I've spoken about in my NFT video, blockchains need to have as little external stuff going on as possible. Everything that can be kept internally within it makes the system more predictable and more stable. So, conclusion, you don't want to introduce external stuff. It screws up the price and makes it unpredictable in yet another way, and we don't need another source of volatility in the Bitcoin market, as we know it's already pretty volatile as it is. So that's why you can't do something useful with the energy. You just have to mine Bitcoin, and I'm sorry, but that is plenty useful enough. Now, the next one is, why can't we have Bitcoin just without the energy consumption at all? People ask that, and it's a good question, but unfortunately it betrays a complete lack of understanding about how you can have a system like Bitcoin in the first place. In order to have Bitcoin as an open, by nature, ledger that anyone can participate in, anyone can append the ledger, and anyone can put data into the blocks that are appended onto that ledger, that means it's an open system. And open systems have to regulate themselves, otherwise they get abused and they become unreliable. So if you want to walk away from all of the benefits of centralization, which are, I can trust that the money in my bank is going to be there tomorrow, I think it's not as reliable as people might think, but it's fairly reliable. The reason it is because it's a private chain and it's maintained by someone, an individual or a corporation that's responsible for that chain or that database. Bitcoin doesn't have any central party like that. So it has to create some sort of barrier to entry that is equal to everyone and equally accessible to everyone. And the only thing that is, or the best we could come up with, and this really is the best thing that there is in my opinion, is the consumption of energy, because anyone can consume energy. There is no there is no that's the only way to do away with authority, because everyone has access to electricity to some extent. Of course, there is economic differences between different parties, but the point is, if you're going to mine something, if you're going to have an open database that can be appended by anyone, it becomes incredibly weak if anyone can append it without any sort of barrier to entry. And the energetic requirement for it means that if you want to do something malicious on this database, if you want to scam anyone, or if you want to damage the network, you have to outcompete everyone else collectively for the amount of energy that you require, or the amount of energy that they're using. That's great, because it means the more energy Bitcoin uses, the harder it is to attack it, because the more energy you need to outpace everyone else. That saves Bitcoin. That's how you have a system like this. At the beginning of Bitcoin, in the first few years, it didn't take a lot of energy to destroy the network. And if we were to try and start something again like Bitcoin, and this is why none of the altcoins will work, because people know what they are now. So if you try and have a new coin that uses proof of work and needs energy consumption, or requires it, but only within a way that's established and slowly grows within its own ecosystem, it will just be destroyed at the very beginning when there isn't much available. So Bitcoin could have been destroyed for years by people with enough energy, but it can't be now, because so much energy is required to destroy and attack the chain that it won't be, which means that you can actually safely and reliably use it as the world's best store of value. And the more you do that, the more people mine, the more energy is consumed, and it self-reinforces. That's why it's generally a good thing, at least from the perspective of Bitcoin itself. But you're still worried about the actual environmental impact of all that energy consumption, which is fair enough. But I think you're a little misdirected if you're being genuine here, and I'm going to assume you're being genuine. It doesn't use anything like the amount of energy that the incumbent financial system uses, and no one ever criticizes. People criticize the government and the Federal Reserve and the policies of Keynesian economics and inflation and all that stuff, the destruction of the middle class and the working class, the erosion of their spending power, the inflation, what I don't mean inflation, I mean the just runaway house prices and ridiculous stocks and shares and everything being in a bubble. People complain about that all the time, but no one has ever, and this would be legitimate, complained about the energy consumption that it takes to maintain that system. And that system, by the way, is propped up by a military. In the case of the dominant world currency, the US dollar, what's the carbon footprint of that military? What's the carbon footprint of the Iraq war? What's the carbon footprint of dropping bomb after bomb after bomb on Syria? Does anyone ask these questions? No, it's just assumed that you will consume energy for certain things because there's just no better way to do it. I'm happy for Bitcoin to sit in that camp. In reality, Bitcoin's a lot better than that, but I'm going to get into that towards the end of this video and show some really strong positive perspective there with regard to Bitcoin and energy consumption. So, but back to the consumption of energy with the incumbent financial system, I find it annoying and frustrating that people are asking me to justify Bitcoin's energy use when no one asks that for anything else, any other institution, including tumble dryers, which in North America use more electricity than all of the Bitcoin mining network combined. And no one ever says, no one's making a movement, ban tumble dryers, just hang your damn clothes up, we don't need that. You don't need it, it's a luxury, it's a convenience, and you're destroying the oceans with it. No one's saying that. And no one generally says this because people are being very irrational when they come up with a fear of Bitcoin mining and a concern about the environment with it. It's an annoying and inconsistent thing, and it's something that generally is, because newspapers can write a headline, Bitcoin mining uses more energy than country. And they love doing this because it generates clicks, but it's disingenuous. And what really frustrates me about it is that they will always use this completely flawed analogy where they say Bitcoin does this many transactions, which means it uses, and at the time of writing, it uses this much energy. So that means if Bitcoin becomes the dominant world currency and the amount of transactions we have is 1,000,000 times the amount of transactions Bitcoin's doing, that means it's going to use 1,000,000 times this amount of energy. That's literally more than the entire world is using right now, and it's not how it works. If you do more transactions in the Bitcoin network, it doesn't mean you use more energy. The energy is used to find blocks. Blocks have a set amount of transactions in them every single time. It's not ironclad because different transactions are different sizes depending on how much data needs to go into it. But what happens is a bunch of people suddenly we can do no transactions for a little while. Blocks will still be getting found every 10 minutes and energy will still go into creating those blocks. Or loads of transactions can be happening, loads and loads and loads of them, and they're not finding enough space in the blocks, and the Bitcoin network doesn't ramp up the energy consumption to add all those transactions in. It just carries on finding a block every 10 minutes, and the amount of energy used to do it is proportional to the difficulty of it, and the difficulty is set by how many people are trying to mine. That's its own area of the Bitcoin network. It's unrelated to transactions. So if someone comes to you and says, and they're talking about transactions per megawatt or whatever, they are being completely disingenuous, or they just really need to look into this properly. They are not understanding a fundamental thing about how the cryptocurrency works. So, all that said, you have you have genuine approaches, and you have people that are looking for a reason to shit on Bitcoin, or there are people just trying to generate clicks. And it's all rather annoying to deal with, but what makes it really frustrating, and this is sad, is that Bitcoin is doing such a positive thing with regard to how our species has a relationship with energy consumption and production. It's changing everything for the better. And this makes it a really annoying, a frustrating thing to combat, because we're actually doing something positive. It's not a thing where we say, yeah, we use energy and it sucks, but we can't find a better alternative. It's true that we can't find a better alternative, but it doesn't suck. What we're doing with Bitcoin is we're finally creating a financial and reliable incentive for an industry of green energy, renewable energy, cheap energy to grow for the first time. It's not coming from the incentive of tax breaks or subsidies, which are kind of the same thing, or just moral incentive. It's not coming from that. It's not coming from guilt. It's coming from a place of, if you want to be profitable, you can't mine using fossil fuels because it's too expensive. And that's why no one mines Bitcoin using fossil fuels unless they're stranded fossil fuels. But I'll get into that in a minute. Nearly all Bitcoin mining happens renewably because it's the only way to do it profitably. And no one wants to mine Bitcoin and lose money because it doesn't work like that. No one is going to burn electricity for no reason. So that means it's largely clean, but it's better than that. It incentivizes a whole industry to develop that couldn't normally develop, because what are the requirements for electricity in years gone by before Bitcoin was invented? Okay, it had to be transported to wherever the humans are, and guess where all the human populations are centered? They're not centered around abundant clean energy sources, because we didn't have electricity till 100 years ago. Before that, everything was based on, is it near an ocean? Is there a river running through the middle of it so we can get boats in and out and deliver stuff? I'm going to choose where I live based on whether my family's there, whether my job is there, whether I speak the native language or whatever. None of the people would ever, and I wager you have never considered in your life, living somewhere specifically based on the nature and the price of the energy that you have available to you. No one's going to do that. It might be an afterthought, or it might be one factor, but to a Bitcoin miner, it's the only factor, save for a couple of caveats of, is it legal in that jurisdiction? And guess what? Bitcoin mining is legal everywhere. So that becomes a moot point. So Bitcoin mining enables humanity for the first time ever to go to a place that has cheap, abundant, renewable energy and say, oh, sorry, I left off one thing. One thing that we've always wanted from our electricity is it has to be 100% reliable. We can't have it cutting out or going back on at random times. We need it to always work. And fossil fuels are great because they always work. And renewables suck because they don't always work. We know that. If it's nighttime, the solar panels aren't working. If it's not windy enough, the wind turbines don't do anything. You know, if it's hydroelectric power, yes, usually that works. It's pretty reliable. But nonetheless, these things always have to form some sort of symbiosis with fossil fuels, and it usually ends up making the fossil fuels even less efficient, because turning on a gas plant and turning it off again when the renewables start ramping up again uses so much more energy than if you just left it on all the time. And usually this is the result of misguided political intentions to make yourself look green when you're actually not green. And we all know that politics messes everything up like that. That's the standard of politics. Here's the intention, here's what looks good on paper, and it actually is worse and the opposite of what the original intention was. So, getting back to where Bitcoin miners are going to locate themselves, they're going to go and find these sources of cheap, renewable, green energy that might not be 100% reliable, but they are going to provide incentive for people to start building this stuff. Finally, because they are going to have a bunch of Bitcoin miners come and say, we want to buy this. If you're going to build a whole wind turbine farm here and you're going to sell your electricity super cheap, cheaper than any of the rates we can get with fossil fuels, we are going to come and we're going to mine there. And us being there creates a reason for this electrical system to become invested in and for people to commit to the whole project, which means eventually a city can exist here. And it eventually means that if your goal, Mr. Environmentalist, is to transition from a culture that is hopelessly dependent on fossil fuels and dirty energy into one where we're using just clean, cheap, renewable energy, I don't know how you get there if it's not for Bitcoin mining, because Bitcoin mining provides the first real incentive that people are actually going to do. All the other incentives are just guilt-based and economically forcing you to do it artificially through carbon taxes and all this stuff that we know is going to be counterproductive. Carbon taxes aren't going to get us anywhere. It's going to be like COVID lockdowns. It's going to drag the whole thing on further. It's going to be fraudulent, and it's going to cost more lives than it benefits us. So if you're on the side of the environmentalists, you need to be on the side of the Bitcoiners too, because they are in agreement. They are doing the same thing. And I didn't understand this for quite a long time, but it's becoming increasingly clear to me that the only way we get and transition into a society, into a culture or a species that doesn't feel the need to do what it's doing with fossil fuels is by having Bitcoin mining make renewable energy a viable option for everyone, rather than a feel-good backup that we use every now and again that we end up just using even more fossil fuels to placate, because we have this, we're falling between two stools at the moment. And there's a very good film on this called Planet of the Humans, which debunks basically the whole scam of the clean green energy movement, because most of it is just headlines and nonsense. I've seen for ages Germany is now running 100% on renewables. No, it's not. I've seen so many claims like that that are just completely specious and designed to make us feel good, but in reality betray an absolute need to look good on paper and without any regard at all for how much worse you're making everything in the long run. So that's generally an outline of why Bitcoin mining has to use energy and why it's a really good thing that it does. And I'm not really I'm hoping that people can finally look at something like this, and I hope I provided a thorough enough understanding of what's going on in this space for people to look at it fairly and honestly and say, this is a good thing and it deserves to be participated in. And I haven't even touched the subject that even if it did use a lot of energy, so what? We need this. We really need it. There's no other. Do you know how many problems exist in the world as a result of the money we use being fundamentally corrupt? If you fix the money, you fix all of the problems that come with having funny money. The Cantillon effect. The fact that we're not living in the abundance we should be, even though we have the amazing technology we have and we have the amazing stability we have, most people, middle class and downwards, are struggling because everything they earn keeps having the value stolen from it. And we're being told lies via the consumer price index. Bitcoin is worth it, even if it was not great for the environment. Reality is it's absolutely great for the environment. So you've got every reason to support this thing. Don't let the energy FUD people throw you off and disingenuously convince you that this is somehow unacceptable, but you can still fly around in an airplane and turn on your tumble dryer and support a military industrial complex, flying airplanes and dropping bombs all over the place and waging war, and all for complete profit motive based on lies about terrorism and blah, yada, yada, yada. If you're going to come at me with energy stuff, and the solution ultimately, that I'd like to finish the video with is, if you're really just concerned about the environment and that's your main thing, fair enough to you. We have similar priorities but slightly different. But if that really is just your main concern, you're not going to ever get humanity to just unplug. Electricity is a genie out of the bottle. It's the can of worms is open, the cat's out the bag. You're not going to stop us using electricity. It's just not practical. So you're going to watch in horror while you're asking people, please don't leave that charging. You know, it's already at 100%. Unplug it from the wall. You know, tiny little savings here and there. Don't use a plastic straw. All these little tiny gestures towards environmentalism, fair enough to you, and I respect you if you do them, but they are not enough. You need something active and positive and changing, and something that's going to affect a big difference. Bitcoin mining is that. That's how you clean up the environment. That's how you get clean energy being ubiquitous to everywhere. And it's incredible that this would come from this, and somewhat unbelievable, but I encourage you to look into it more and to establish this for yourself beyond a doubt. Main thing you need to remember when you get hit by these energy FUD people is 70% of it minimum is renewable. The other 30% is stranded fossil fuels, which is gas flares getting let off randomly by people working on oil rigs because they don't want loads of natural gas hanging around, so they have to burn it off just for their basic safety. Bitcoin miners love that stuff because it's free energy, it's unwanted energy, it's abandoned, it can't be transported, not efficiently anyway. So they go to where the energy is and they use it right then and there. That gets you away from all the inefficiencies of transportation, all that stuff. And it means humanity goes to where the energy is. It doesn't try to bring the energy to where it is, because that's inefficient and wasteful. So Bitcoin is all about optimizing everything and using everything that we've got as efficiently as possible. That is a good thing to do. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for watching this video, and have a good day.